He doesn't belong with you. You're setting yourself up for failure." They sneered, their voices dripping with condescension. Yet, as they stood outside his front door years later, desperate, broken, and pleading, those same voices held no trace of mockery, only fear and regret. Michael Foster was a man many would describe as ordinary. A middle-aged teacher in a small Midwestern town, he wasn't one to seek the spotlight. He had a modest home, a predictable routine, and an unshakable belief in doing what was right. It was that belief that led him to a decision that turned his quiet life upside down. It started on an ordinary afternoon at the local foster care center. Michael often volunteered there, helping with tutoring and reading sessions for kids who didn't have stable homes. But that day was different. That day he met Jamal. Jamal was 7 years old, with big brown eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. He was quiet, cautious, and heartbreakingly aware of his surroundings. Michael learned that Jamal had bounced between homes after losing his mother to an illness and having no father to claim him. Most prospective parents overlooked him. Some openly admitted they didn't want to adopt a black child in a predominantly white town. Michael couldn't stop thinking about Jamal. Every time he saw the boy sitting in the corner of the room, drawing quietly or watching the other kids play, something tugged at his heart. One night, lying awake, he realized he could offer Jamal something no one else had: a family. When Michael announced his decision to adopt Jamal, the response from his community was swift and cruel. "Michael, you're biting off more than you can chew," warned his neighbor, Mr. Carter, shaking his head. "You have no idea what kind of trouble this will bring you." "You're a single white man," scoffed Lisa, a coworker. "How do you think people are going to react when they see you with a black child? It's unnatural." Even at the grocery store, strangers whispered. At church, congregants gave him patronizing smiles and avoided sitting near him. But the worst came from Michael's own family. "Why would you do this, Mike?" his sister, Emily, asked during a family dinner. "You don't know anything about raising a black kid. People are going to assume the worst about you. What if Jamal resents you one day?" But Michael stood firm. "Jamal needs a family, Emily, and I'm not going to let other people's ignorance stop me from giving him one." Adjusting to life as a father wasn't easy. Jamal was wary of Michael at first, unsure if this new home was permanent. Michael, in turn, struggled to navigate the nuances of raising a black child in a town that seemed determined to remind them of their differences. At school, Jamal faced teasing from classmates. "Where's your real dad?" they jeered. "What do you live with him?" Michael fought back tears when Jamal asked him one night, "Why do they hate me, Mr. Foster?" Michael knelt down and looked Jamal in the eyes. "Listen to me, buddy. People fear what they don't understand. But you're strong and you're kind, and none of those kids know how amazing you are. We'll show them, okay?" Slowly, Michael started to learn. He joined online forums for transracial adoptive parents. He read books about black history, talked to black parents in neighboring towns, and even learned how to style Jamal's hair after watching hours of YouTube tutorials. For every challenge, Michael met it with determination and love. But as the years passed, the town's skepticism turned to outright hostility. Jamal was now 10 years old, and the bond between him and Michael was unshakable. Yet their closeness only seemed to enrage those who couldn't accept them. One day, Michael found graffiti on his garage door, "Juboxy to WHRUBLONJ." Another time, Jamal came home in tears after a classmate's parent refused to let him attend a birthday party. The breaking point came during a town meeting when Michael tried to advocate for a new after-school program. A local businessman stood up and sneered, "Why should we listen to someone who can't even take care of his own kind? Maybe you should focus on fixing your little project instead of meddling in town affairs." Michael clenched his fists but kept his voice steady. "My son is not a project. He's a human being. And if you can't see that, then maybe you're the one who needs fixing." Amid the hostility, there were a few who stood by Michael and Jamal. Mrs. Andrews, an elderly widow who lived next door, often invited them over for cookies and shared stories about her own struggles with prejudice growing up. "You're doing the right thing, Michael," she said one evening. "Love doesn't see color. Keep fighting for that boy. He's worth it." But even Michael couldn't foresee just how much his love for Jamal would be tested, or how their story would take a turn that no one in the town could have imagined. Years passed, and Michael's love for Jamal grew stronger with each challenge. Jamal was now a teenager, navigating life in a town that still eyed him with suspicion. but their bond was unbreakable. Michael taught Jamal to rise above the noise, to focus on his dreams, and to believe in himself. Then, one fateful spring evening, everything changed. The storm came with no warning. What started as a drizzle quickly turned into torrential rain, accompanied by winds strong enough to uproot trees. By the time the town's emergency sirens wailed, it was too late for many to evacuate. The river that bordered the town overflowed, flooding homes and cutting off entire neighborhoods. Michael and Jamal had been watching the storm from their living room when the power went out. Moments later, a frantic pounding on the door startled them. "Mr. Foster, help us." It was Miss Andrews, their elderly neighbor. Her house was quickly filling with water, and she could barely stand against the rising flood. Without hesitation, Michael grabbed his boots and waded into the icy water to carry her to safety. But that was just the beginning. Over the next few hours, Michael and Jamal worked tirelessly, rescuing stranded neighbors, offering shelter to those who had nowhere else to go, and sharing whatever supplies they had. By morning, the storm had passed, but the town was unrecognizable. Streets were submerged, homes destroyed, and lives upended. Among those affected were the very people who had mocked Michael for adopting Jamal. The Carter family, who had always been the first to criticize Michael, now stood on their roof, waving desperately for help. Their youngest daughter, Emily, was sick and needed medical attention. Without hesitation, Michael and Jamal used their canoe to navigate the floodwaters and bring the Carters to safety. When they reached dry ground, Mr. Carter couldn't meet Michael's eyes. "Thank you," he muttered, his voice heavy with shame. Michael simply nodded. "We look out for each other. That's what neighbors do." As the days turned into weeks, the town struggled to rebuild. Michael and Jamal became unofficial leaders of the recovery effort. Michael's teaching background made him a natural organizer, while Jamal, now 16, worked tirelessly to distribute food and supplies. Word of their efforts spread, and soon, even the most hardened skeptics couldn't deny their impact. Lisa, the coworker who had once questioned Michael's decision, approached him during a volunteer meeting. "I was wrong about you," she admitted. "And about Jamal. You've done more for this town than anyone else." But Michael shrugged off the praise. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about doing what's right, always." One evening, after a long day of cleanup, Jamal found Michael sitting on their porch, staring at the horizon. "You okay, Dad?" Jamal asked, using the title he'd grown comfortable with over the years. Michael smiled, pulling Jamal into a side hug. "I'm proud of you, kid. You've become the man I always knew you'd be." Jamal hesitated before speaking. "Do you ever regret adopting me? With everything that's happened, all the hate we've faced, was it worth it?" Michael turned to him, his eyes filled with conviction. "Jamal, you are the best decision I ever made, and I'd do it all over again in a heartbeat." For the first time in years, Jamal felt truly at peace. The flood became a turning point for the town. People began to see Michael and Jamal not as an anomaly, but as an example of resilience and compassion. At a town hall meeting a month after the storm, the mayor publicly recognized their efforts. "Michael Foster and his son Jamal remind us of what it means to be a community," he said. "They've shown us that love and determination can overcome any obstacle." The applause was thunderous, but what meant the most to Michael was the way Jamal beamed with pride. Just as the town was beginning to rebuild its sense of community, another crisis struck, this time more insidious and personal. It began with whispers, items disappearing from homes, vehicles vandalized under the cover of night. Fear and suspicion spread like wildfire. One morning, Michael woke to find his own garage door spray painted with the word "Teach IF." Jamal, who had been preparing for school, froze when he saw it. "Dad, why would someone do this to us?" he asked, his voice trembling. Michael's jaw tightened. "I don't know, we'll figure it out. Don't let this get to you, okay?" But as the days passed, the situation escalated. Other neighbors began receiving similar graffiti, their belongings mysteriously vanishing. It didn't take long for fingers to point toward Jamal. The Carter family, despite being rescued by Michael and Jamal during the flood, was among the first to spread the rumors. "I saw that boy lurking around my property last night," Mr. Carter claimed at a community meeting. Others quickly chimed in. "He doesn't belong here anyway. Michael should have known better than to bring him into our town. I've seen him hanging out with troublemakers from the next town over." Michael stood up, his voice calm but firm. "Jamal hasn't done anything wrong. He's being targeted because of who he is and who we are. If you have evidence, show it. But don't you dare accuse my son without proof." Despite his words, the damage was done. Jamal became the subject of suspicion wherever he went. One afternoon, Jamal came home from school visibly shaken. When Michael asked what was wrong, Jamal finally broke down. "They searched my locker, Dad. The principal said someone accused me of stealing a teacher's wallet. They didn't find anything, but it doesn't matter. Everyone looks at me like I'm a criminal." Michael hugged him tightly. "Jamal, listen to me. You've done nothing wrong. We'll fight this together just like we always have." But privately, Michael felt helpless. He could see how the weight of the town's judgment was crushing Jamal's spirit. The tension reached a boiling point one evening when the police showed up at Michael's door. A break-in had occurred at the mayor's house, and Jamal was being accused. Michael refused to let them take Jamal without evidence. "You're targeting him because he's black and because he's my son. Unless you have proof, you're not laying a finger on him." But the officers insisted, and Jamal was taken in for questioning. As Michael watched his son being driven away, his heart broke. The entire ordeal was a nightmare. Although Jamal was released after hours of interrogation and no evidence was found, the damage to his reputation and their lives seemed irreversible. As Michael struggled to clear Jamal's name, help came from an unexpected source, Mrs. Andrews. "I saw something the other night," she told Michael, her hands shaking. There were two boys, teenagers, breaking into a car down the street. Neither of them was Jamal. "I know what I saw." Armed with her testimony, Michael began digging deeper. He learned that a group of local troublemakers had been responsible for the thefts and vandalism. They had been targeting Jamal to divert suspicion from themselves. Michael gathered the evidence and presented it to the authorities. With Mrs. Andrews' statement and security footage from a neighbor's camera, the truth finally came to light. When the truth was revealed, some members of the community apologized to Michael and Jamal, but others clung to their prejudice. "Maybe he didn't do it this time," Mr. Carter muttered. "But that doesn't mean he's innocent." Michael had had enough. At the next town meeting, he stood before the crowd and spoke with unwavering conviction. "You all mocked me when I adopted Jamal. You said I couldn't do it, that we didn't belong. But when the flood came, who was there for you? When your families were in danger, who stepped up? My son has done more for this town than most of you ever will. And yet, you still treat him like he's less than human. That ends today." His words left the room in stunned silence. For the first time, many were forced to confront their own biases. At home, Michael found Jamal sitting quietly on the porch, staring at the stars. "Do you ever wish you'd never adopted me?" Jamal asked softly. Michael knelt beside him. "Never. You are my son, Jamal. Nothing and no one can ever change that. And I'll keep fighting for you, no matter what." Jamal leaned into his father's embrace, the weight of the past weeks finally lifting. After Michael's powerful speech at the town meeting, the tension in the community reached its peak. The flood had forced people to rely on one another, but the accusations against Jamal threatened to tear them apart again. However, something began to change. A few brave individuals started speaking out in support of Michael and Jamal. Mrs. Andrews organized a neighborhood gathering to discuss the issues of prejudice and mistrust openly. For the first time, people shared their fears and biases and began to confront them. "I've been wrong," Lisa admitted during the meeting, tears in her eyes. "I judged Jamal because of his skin color, because of my own ignorance. But I see now how unfair that was. I'm sorry." Her apology set off a chain reaction. More people stood up, acknowledging their mistakes and vowing to do better. Michael and Jamal's story began to spread beyond their small town. A local journalist wrote an article about their struggles and resilience, highlighting Michael's unwavering love for his son and the challenges they faced together. The story went viral, bringing attention to the issues of racism and transracial adoption in America. Donations poured in to support the recovery efforts in the town, many of them inspired by Michael and Jamal's example. A group of activists even offered to host workshops on diversity and inclusion for the community. At first, some resisted the idea. "We don't need outsiders telling us how to live," Mr. Carter grumbled. But others saw it as an opportunity for growth. Mrs. Andrews, who had become a vocal advocate for change, replied, "We've spent too long letting fear and ignorance divide us. It's time to learn how to come together." Meanwhile, Jamal found his confidence growing. Encouraged by his father and the support of new allies in the town, he began to dream bigger. One day, he approached Michael with an idea. Dad, I want to start a mentorship program for kids like me. There are so many kids in this town who feel out of place, like they don't belong. Maybe I can help them the way you helped me. Michael's eyes filled with pride. That's an incredible idea, Jamal. Let's make it happen. With the help of a few community leaders, Jamal launched the program, calling it Bridging the Gap. It offered tutoring, sports activities, and workshops to bring kids from all backgrounds together. The program was an instant success, breaking down barriers and building friendships across racial and socioeconomic lines. Not everyone embraced the change. One evening, Michael received an anonymous letter in the mail. It was filled with hateful rhetoric and ended with a chilling warning. This town doesn't need your kind. Leave or else. Michael showed the letter to Jamal, who read it silently before looking up at his father. What do? We stay, Michael said firmly. Fear doesn't win. Love does. The next day, Michael shared the letter at a community meeting. This is what we're up against, he said, holding the paper high. But we're not backing down. We've come too far to let hate stop us now. The room erupted in applause, a show of solidarity that drowned out the voices of dissent. Over time, the community began to heal. Michael and Jamal's perseverance inspired others to confront their own biases and work toward a more inclusive future. Even Mr. Carter, who had been one of their harshest critics, came to Michael's door one evening. He looked down at his feet as he spoke. I've been wrong about you, about Jamal. You've shown me what real strength looks like. So Michael extended his hand. It's never too late to do the right thing. Years later, Jamal stood on a stage at his high school graduation, delivering the valedictorian speech. He spoke about his journey, his father's unwavering love, and the lessons he had learned about resilience and forgiveness. This town taught me what it means to fight for what's right, Jamal said, his voice steady and confident. Taught me that even when the world seems against you, love can build bridges that hate can't tear down. Michael sat in the audience, tears streaming down his face. As the crowd erupted in applause, Michael knew that every struggle, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt had been worth it. Jamal's mentorship program continued to grow, eventually expanding to neighboring towns. Michael became a sought-after speaker, sharing his story to inspire others. The small town, once divided by prejudice, became a symbol of reconciliation and hope, and at the heart of it all were a father and son whose bond had withstood every storm. Because love, as Michael and Jamal proved, is the most powerful force of all.